I'm talking Voxtur with Colin. Voxtur just reported the numbers. And today we have a little surprise because we're going to actually see Colin on the camera. So I was wondering, Colin, what changed? Did you like the Q1 numbers so much that you decided to show your face?
No. Just thought it might be better, rather than the floating sea.
All right, cool. So let's talk about the numbers. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Do you have any insight that you can share?
Well, I mean, I think in general, I think everyone's been quiet. Well, maybe I shouldn't speak for other people. I've been quiet. I mean, there's nothing really to say that hasn't been said at this point. I think people are either going to find the good in things or find the bad in things, and they've figured out their encampment. I believe that, I don't think we've seen Armageddon in the financial services of real estate like that has happened ever. I mean, we've never seen, if you look at the 13-week yield, it went up like 14,000% in the period of 2.5 years or 2 years or a year and a half or whatever the hell it was exactly. But, so we've had this violent change in the change of interest rates. It stopped basically refinances in its tracks. It dropped new acquisitions in its tracks. You had the rate at which Voxtur's own debt went up by multiple hundreds of percent. And so, there's a lot of really good things that you could say about management having to been able to navigate through this absolute quagmire and hellscape of the mortgage real estate industry. So now some people will say, oh, you're just pumping their tires, or you're doing this, that, or the other thing. It's just truthfully the fact. Have they done some actions which I think were own goals? I've said it before, I think they have. But in general, I think they're doing all the right moves. They've paid, total debt basically a year ago was about 90.4. That's all liabilities. That's current debt, new debt, accounts payable, figure out all the things that were payable, not net debt, just total debts, was 90.4. The current debt is now 56.9. So 33.5 debt has been repaid. And I think there's a lot of, and the reason I'm focusing on this is that, I think a lot of people have focused on the survivability of Voxtur and what they're able to do, and are there any value in the assets that they have? And I think, them selling that asset gave truth to the statements that there are value in the companies that are underpinning this company. They got, I think, a fair price. They, I think, did as well as, probably much better than people expected, but as well as could be accomplished within the confines of the market at the time. So I think they've done an excellent job on that. That said, they got themselves into this space, but a whole industry got themselves into this space, and I think they've done, for the most part, a very excellent job in navigating their way out, and the fact that they're still on course, the fact that they've paid down in excess of 37%. There's an interesting concept called debt pay down yield. And it's the total debt issued, and I'm using a total encapsulation, so total debt issued minus total debt repaid, divided by the latest market cap. And the debt pay down yield, which is an internal yield of how the debt is being paid down, so there's a whole bunch of different metrics that you can look at. The debt, but because they've focused on debt pay down yield, the debt pay down yield on this company is 83.0, just around 83%, which I think is a significantly interesting point. I will say it's not my primary indicator, but when you have a company that's in the process of paying down their debt, I think that's a telling amount based on how that will drive, I think, in the long term, value to the equity side. Under ideal circumstances, you want a certain amount of leverage within the company. That changes materially when it's 2% yield on your debt versus double-digit yield on your debt. So I think they've been prudent in what they're doing. Debt, if it's not, for a whole host of reasons, there's a threshold where debt becomes caustic, and then there's another side of that where it becomes beneficial and can drive growth. I think everybody in the current situation, in the current marketplace, looks at the debt. So anyway, it's a debt pay down yield of 83% over the last year. I think that's significant. It's an internal metric. I think it was nice to see the gross margins stay at 67%. We've seen 67%. I think it was in Q2. I think we saw 67%. It dropped down and then is now rebounded.
Q3. So it was 67 in Q3, then it dropped to 62 in Q4, and now it's back.
Right. Q3, sorry. And so, it's good to see it come back with only a singular quarter. I've been thinking about, when you and I were chatting about, the Q4 comparisons. One of the problems when you have a Q4 comparison, so if you do quarter over quarter, is that there is quite a bit of seasonality in these numbers. And so I think having a year over year comparison at least eliminates the seasonality. It also, one of the problems with Q4 is when you look at a lot of the audited statements, because the other quarters are not audited, there's a certain amount of what I call kitchen sink accounting, a bunch of stuff that didn't get accounted for, or there's some loose ends. They get cleaned up and dealt with in Q4 for the annual financial statement. So some of that, I think, now things like revenue is revenue and expenses are expensive, but some of the other things like EBITDA and whatever, I think there's a little bit of kitchen sink that gets caught up in some of that stuff. So I'm happy with the number in that it has stopped the bleed. I think the consistent fact that there has been this statement that they were always just around the corner from cash flow break even, net income positive, and all this stuff. I think everybody, myself included, is in the show me state. I want to see these numbers on black and white in a quarterly statement and not hear it that it's around the corner. What I took away from that conference call was that there's a lumpy element that comes out of Blue Water. And with Blue Water, I think we can have some very spectacular quarters. The problem is that lumpiness and the noise that can come with that type of business. And he mentioned, I'm blanking on the terms of the flow, which is the sort of more steady state stuff that disappeared. With that coming back, I think there's going to be some great benefits to see a steadier climb with that. Then we'll get some lumpy one-time stuff, which, the larger blocks of sales. And I think that'll be very beneficial. It'll add cash to the balance sheet. It'll be super high margin. That's all great. But what I took away from it, and the reason I asked the question on the call was, I wanted to get a better understanding of what are all the other metrics and services and businesses that are going to drive a more steady state, consistently growing business. Remember, foreclosures are at an all-time low, originations are at an all-time low, settlement, all those elements, beginning to end, has been completely and utterly wiped out in the marketplace, and it's slowly starting to come back. And so I suspect as we start to see interest rates going down, that just pent up demand that can't be held, can't remain pent up, is going to start coming back into the marketplace. Buyers and sellers in the capital markets are going to start getting used to the new normal. Once all that starts to come in, I think we're actually going to start getting more than just a singular cylinder firing. I think we're going to start seeing more cylinders fire at the same time. So, I am cautiously optimistic, is what I would say about these numbers. It was nice to see that they were steady state positive year over year. I mean, they weren't blowout numbers year over year. Quarter over quarter, they were blowout numbers. The problem is we just don't have any color as to the quality of that earning in terms of what's the repeatability, where did it come from, and what are we expecting, for visibility of Q2 numbers. So I will say that I think that the management is being chastised harshly for some things that they've done, which I don't think are great. But I'd say for the most part, they've done actually a very strong job of managing through a very, very hard time. There's a lot of, I go back to my things. I would love for them to move to just US only in terms of their sales, in terms of reporting, and get rid of that, FX conversion noise. I mean, it adds a huge amount of variability to a bunch of the metrics. So I'd like to see some of that, and I'd like to see them finally start to break this stuff out so we have a better understanding as to what is actually driving the ship, and so we can get a better understanding of what the earnings qualities are and how many of the different sectors are starting to fire. What I am suspecting will start to happen is, all things in life, slowly at first, then all at once. We're going to see blue water. I think what I would have normally expected was certain areas of the business to slow down and other ones to pick up. But because of the policy announcements of moratoriums, the interest rates hitting, and certain things, just the natural metric, the natural elements of the marketplace were not allowed to take hold. And so I think it has had abnormal and adverse effects for this company. I think what we're going to start seeing is that where normally one or two would come out at a certain point, I think we're actually going to see a gradual growth of all of the different metrics, with certain outliers like the blue water, larger capital market stuff potentially hitting at multiple times. We just don't know when that's going to happen. Maybe a whole bunch happen in Q2 and we have a blowout quarter, or maybe they get moved to Q3. I mean, there seems to be more of a habit of these things being pushed out than brought forward, but I expect that we'll see more of that happening, and potentially in Q2 we'll have potentially have a better quarter. It's just really hard to tell because there's just so little color being provided.
Yeah, I mean, Q4, as you said, and I made this in the video, the Q4 numbers, there was an auditing issue that too much revenue was shown in the prior quarter, and then it had to be adjusted down in the fourth quarter because of that. So it's to your point of how the first three quarters are unaudited and the fourth one could have an impact. But it was nice to see, because I wasn't looking forward to these numbers. Gary even said on the conference call, for Q4, he didn't. He said, "Well, Q1 is going to be kind of similar to Q4." Well, I mean, 35% up in revenue is nothing similar.
Well, so let's go back to that. What your original point was that there was an auditing differential rather than a business differential. If it weren't for the fact that they didn't go back and correct Q3, they just corrected it in Q4. What happens is you get, from an accounting perspective, a suppression in Q4, and you get, therefore, Q4 looks worse. But from a business to business comparative, we would have had a very comparable Q1 to Q4. So from Gary's perspective, if you think about somebody in the weeds day to day looking at it, he's saying, oh, these numbers are compared to these, but he may have not thought, oh, right, the reporting was we had to make an adjustment from one quarter to the next, which artificially suppressed Q4. So that's where I think, and quite frankly, let's be, in my opinion, I would have rather them go back and correct Q3, push it down and left, because that would have made Q3 and Q4 look sequentially in a positive manner, and then Q4 to Q1 would have looked probably flat from a top line revenue, but there's some seasonality in that that affects both quarters. And so I think in Q2, from seasonality and a few other things, but I think it would have been better to see Q3 down, Q4 higher than Q3, and Q1 somewhere in the same vicinity. Just from a psychological point of view, it would have pushed the view that things had actually started to turn around back, not one quarter, but 6-7 months, because Q4 takes 6 months to push it, come out. We would have had one good positive, and then we would have had a second good positive. So, but that's more the psychology than the reality.
Yeah. Anything else you want to share?
I think that's it. I think the bulls and the bear are both in the show me state. And I think in general, this was a good quarter, given what they've gotten through. I think the only thing that I think is problematic, or that is that there are these expectations that get set and then constantly pushed out. I just wish there was no setting of expectations. Just say we will get to break even, we will do, but here are the conditions that have to exist for us to get to that. Rather than say, oh, Q1 these conditions will be break even, without outlining the conditions, without explaining what has to be true for that situation to happen. The way it's communicated is, it's more of a communication problem. We're going to be break even or profitable Q1. Oh no, it's going to be Q2, but we don't know what was going to drive it in Q1. We don't know what's going to drive it in Q2. And so I think if they simply said, if you have flour and you have salt and you have water and you bake it at this, you will get a pizza dough, give us something that we can work with. So we ourselves can gauge the metrics and the reality on the ground. And so I think it's more of a communication. I still don't love their financial reporting. There's so much work that has to be done in terms of isolating cash flow from operations one quarter over the next. The noise for the FX. There's a whole bunch of things that make you have to work harder than you need to for a small cap company in terms of actually diving through the different elements. But like I said, I'm cautiously optimistic. Some people with some, like a IQ or a Thomson or a Bloomberg terminal may see screenings of some of the benefits of, because it does the calculations automatically, of some of the benefits that are actually happening, and some of the positivity that's starting to show up in the financial metrics. I think that if they get rid of another non-core asset, it's probably not a bad idea. I think they did a good job by getting rid of the previous. I mean, we're only $3 million off of our best ever gross profit, and we're down 50% or something year over year from, you know, without the isolation of the continuing of the disposed assets. So the revenue from the disposed assets. So, you know, we're looking, I think, relatively good in the metrics that are important: revenue and gross margins. That drives everything else out. And I also think they've done an excellent job in terms of controlling costs. I mean, with the same metrics, the EBITDA, I think, was negative. You know, what the metrics were last year for
Negative 4.3 million last year.
4.3 to 6. I mean, they've done some excellent work to drive out costs. And so if they, and he made mention that there may be additional costs, but he's at that sort of inflection point of, you know, you have to build out some of your platforms. Some of these platforms start going from being a pure cost center to starting to derive income. That's another inflection point. The question is going to be, how quickly is the traction in the marketplace? So we're going to have to see some of that stuff. So that there's again, cautiously optimistic. Some of the metrics are starting to look pretty excellent. I would really like to see if we can break into the 70% plus gross margins for Q2. I suspect that as the speed and the different business units start to pick up, I think we're going to start seeing an expansion of the gross margins as well, which would be quite excellent to see.
All right, cool. Thanks for doing this.
All right. Thanks very much, Mariusz. Take care.